Hello, I'm James Dart, co-founder of Inspire You and Yes, I Will Vote, and welcome to the 6th episode of Remoaner Telling Our Story series podcast. On this week's episode, we have Sue Wilson, the chair of Bremain in Spain. We talk about why Bremain was set up originally, what it's doing now, and what the situation is for EU citizens living in the UK and for British citizens living in the EU post-Brexit. I hope you enjoy. So hi, Sue.
Hello. Hi, James.
How's it going?
Fine, thank you. Glad I'm in Spain.
Yeah, sunny Spain, yeah. Bristol's pretty rainy today, as we just spoke about. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being on the Remoaner's Telling Our Story podcast. I always say, just at the beginning of the episode, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title, but with the purpose of trying to unpick what exactly a Remainer or Remoaner is, which we'll get to later in the show. So thank you very much for being with us. First question then, who is Sue Wilson? Tell me about who you were before all of the campaigning stuff.
Well, I've been in Spain for 14 years. So when I was in the UK, I was a sales manager and a management trainer. I moved to Spain 14 years ago, and I worked here as an English language teacher.
Okay.
And then the plan was to retire.
Yeah.
But then the referendum happened and kind of the idea of retirement went out of the window. So I'm now a full-time campaigner, as I have been since the referendum. I'm officially a UK pensioner now. So I'm retired, married, no kids, 4 cats.
4 cats, brilliant.
Yes.
Oh, fab. Okay. So you are now a full-time campaigner. So presumably before the referendum, this wasn't part of your life.
No, absolutely not. I was not particularly interested in current affairs. I had no interest whatsoever in politics. So to actually become interested in politics against my better judgment was something I wasn't expecting to happen.
Really? Okay. That's interesting. So I have a sort of, my second question really on here is, what were you doing on the day of the referendum? So presumably not a great deal campaign wise.
No, I wasn't doing any campaigning at that stage.
No.
But I was very interested in what was going on by then. I guess I started to take real notice about 6 months before, when it started to get more real, and also when things started to look like perhaps they wouldn't go the way that we'd hoped. And then by the time that the referendum actually happened, I was starting to get a really bad feeling that it was all going to go horribly wrong.
Really? Okay.
So I stayed up all night to prove myself wrong.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I proved myself right.
That's actually really interesting, because the very few people I've spoken to, Leave or Remain, had a feeling that it was going to go the way of Leave. So you had a sense, was that from living out in Spain, do you think, or just?
I think just from devouring the news in the UK, I just started to get a really nasty feeling that, everybody was saying, oh, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And I just started to get the feeling that it wasn't going to be fine after all.
Okay. Oh, so you actually had better instincts than the vast majority of us. So I guess, I think for me, at least at that stage, it wasn't so much that I was following the news really. It was that I just dipped my toe in very slightly at that stage, but I was totally ignorant of the picture, of the wider picture. So maybe that's why I just felt it's going to go the way of Remain. It might be marginal, but it's going to go the way of the Remain. But
I thought it was going to be close, and it was close. As the night went on, watching the results come in, you kept waiting for the big one, like Birmingham, for example, that was going to push things in the other direction, but it never happened.
No, exactly. Yeah. I remember, obviously, the exit poll was Leave, wasn't it? And usually the exit poll is like the most accurate poll. The exit polls haven't been wrong, have they, for a long?
They're normally pretty close, I think.
Yeah, and when it said Leave, I was just like, oh, that's not good. So what was your immediate reaction when the result was finalised? When
it was finally announced, and it was about 6 o'clock in the morning, I just burst into tears.
Really?
It was a mixture of shock and horror, disbelief. And a friend of mine phoned me at 6 in the morning in exactly the same state, knowing full well that I'd be up all night watching it as well.
Yeah.
And we just, we couldn't believe it. We were just talking through, what's just happened? What does it mean? What happens next?
Do you think, this is an interesting one, because I have some friends around my age who I would say are fairly politically apathetic, don't really get it. And when I talk about like the emotional toll that Brexit's had, not just on me, but on millions of people, like particularly, and like people like yourself, they just look at me with a blank face, like, how can you possibly be that upset about something like this? Like, are you able to capture, considering you weren't a campaigner at that stage, are you able to sort of say why you burst into tears at that moment?
No, I don't know why it affected me so deeply, and still does.
No.
I've never been able to explain that. I mean, lots of people at the time said how it compared to what you go through when you're grieving. And it was exactly like that, except, we never got to the acceptance stage. There was anger, there was depression, there was sadness. And I found out that I found out I was an angrier person than I thought I was.
Yeah, me too. But justifiably so in this case.
And there was a lot of swearing, I remember.
I'm sure I read a paper somewhere that smart people swear more, something like that. I always take that. So let's just move forward a little bit to, because I want to come back to the whole sort of identity thing and around what it is to be a Remainer and all that stuff later. But how did you, Sue Wilson, how did you get from somebody that was crying on the day of the referendum? So it's obviously got a deep emotional tie to this this project, to actually becoming a campaigner. Because I did a little bit of research about your story, and it was pretty rapid, wasn't it? That your sort of movement into campaigning.
Yeah, it took me about 3 weeks. For the first 3 weeks after the referendum, I was just on a complete roller coaster. I was bursting into tears at the drop of a hat. I was getting angry for no good reason, and that happened every day for 3 weeks. I mean, I just don't know where that came from. And then on day 22, I just kind of woke up in the morning and thought, I'm not going to cry today. I'm going to do something.
Yeah.
So luckily, a friend of mine recommended Bremain in Spain to me, which was a group that had been started the day after the referendum by 2 British women living in Barcelona.
Okay.
So I joined the group. I got very active very quickly, so much so that they kept asking me if I would administer the Facebook page, and I kept resisting and saying no. But gradually, over the space of a few weeks, by the time it got to September, they'd asked me if I would take the group over completely, which I did, because it had grown so quickly. And beyond all their expectations, and both of their founders had young children and their own businesses, and it was just too much. So as of September 2016, I became the chair of the group.
And you're still the chair today, is that right?
And I'm still the chair today. Yeah. It's an obsession.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the top campaigners are obsessed with their work, aren't they? I mean, you have to be almost.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting to go from being almost a sort of a political novice to being a full-time campaigner. I mean, so have you been working throughout this period as well, professionally?
I was in the early stages, but not for very long. I think basically it's been 7 days a week for 4.5 years.
Really? Okay.
I've taken it on holiday with me.
Really?
I think I've had something like 2 weeks off in 4 years.
Really? That's nuts. Dude, that is actually nuts.
Yes.
I mean, I can sort of, my story is similar in that sense. Actually, I live and breathe it, and I really don't tend to take time off. The only time I've ever sort of like taken off, as it were, was after the general election, where I just decided I was just going to do Christmas and just not touch politics for Christmas. But yeah, you can't really leave it, can you? Because it means so much. You're so emotionally connected to it, aren't you?
And I mean, I've found that social media is pretty addictive anyway. Yeah. And I always want to know what's going on. So even when I tried, like, going on holiday and saying, right, I'm not going to look at the newspapers today, I was my own worst enemy. I couldn't not know what was going on.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah. Because you a couple of days and all of a sudden you're completely out of the loop, and you just think, oh, what's going on in the world? I need to know, sort of thing. Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. Tell me a little bit more about the sort of what Bremain was set up to do, its aims, its values, what it was looking to achieve in the early days. Because obviously the people's vote came along some while later, didn't it? So there was that period where it all felt a little bit rudderless. There wasn't like when Jack and I set Inspire You up. Our aim at that stage was to sort of quote unquote challenge the inevitability of Brexit. We didn't really know where that was going to take us, but we just thought it's just such a mad thing that's happening. Surely we need to just keep the conversation going for the time being and just see how this works out. So what were the aims of Bremain at the sort of very early stages, 2016?
I mean, certainly it was to stop Brexit. There was no question. All our members always have been and still are Remainers. There are plenty of other groups that cater for Brits abroad, and many of them have Remainers and Leavers in them. But we always found...
What do we call Brits abroad? Are you guys expats?
And we're immigrants. No, we're immigrants.
Yeah. What
I hate the term expats, although it is easy to use for a shorthand, and everybody in the UK understands it, and obviously the media use it. But we don't want to identify ourselves as any different from any other immigrant, like EU citizens in the UK. Okay. We're foreigners. Yeah, in a foreign country, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, of course not. No, of course not. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Sorry, I forgot what the question was.
Oh, you were sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted you. It was you were talking about the fact that everyone in the group were Remainers, and you were trying to stop Brexit. That was your objective earlier.
I have visited other groups where there's a mixture, and especially in the early days, although. Since Brexit happened as well, it's been true. Some of the conversations are very argumentative, and there's so much vitriol. And one of the main purposes of Bremain in the early days, and still now, is to be a support function. We want to know what people really think. And if you mix in both sides of the argument, you don't get the same level of openness or honesty as you would. So it's always been, an anti-Brexit group, but, the idea is to, start a conversation with like-minded individuals to provide some kind of level of support and understanding.
Yeah.
Also to keep people informed, because obviously there's been so much going on and people didn't know how that was going to affect their rights or affect them personally or their families. So it's partly about communication, but say it's also about providing that support as well. And I mean, that's the reason I joined the group in the first place, and I found that very valuable. So it's been a pleasure to be able to continue down that road, and and for a very long time, I think we gave people some hope that we could actually stop this thing, and at least now we're now. Obviously, now Brexit's happened, now then we want to mitigate the damage. And there's a lot that we need to do in Spain in order to make sure that people are properly registered, that they don't lose the rights that we have managed to retain. But also, to continue the fight. Brexit might be over, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the story.
Quite right, and I think that's something that the Remain community is, I think, grappling with a little bit, is to what extent do we continue to focus our efforts now on either rejoining or on mitigating the current damage, or do we focus on other political ideas that we need to focus on, like, say, for instance, electoral reform. So it's interesting, because the question I had down next was to sort of say, have the objectives, or what were the sort of key deliverables that you thought were realistic? Have they changed over time, or have they always been the same and remain the same now?
Well, it was always to stop Brexit and to protect citizens' rights. Obviously, we didn't stop Brexit, but we can still hold the government to account as far as that's concerned. But the citizens' rights thing will go on. because although obviously we've concentrated to some degree on the rights of Brits that are already in Spain or are already in Europe, it's also about those potential rights for Brits in the UK that want to do what we did, want to take advantage of the benefits that we took. And obviously that's very different as of the 1st of January this year.
For those who perhaps don't understand or perhaps don't know, I'm not entirely sure I fully understand, but who represents you? Because you don't vote in Spain, do you? And you've no longer got MEPs to lobby. So do you lobby MPs, your former MPs from the UK?
We do, but it does rather come with diminishing returns, especially once anyone's been out of the country for 15 years, because we lose our vote then. I've been here 14 years, so unless the Tories suddenly follow through on their oft-repeated manifesto promise to give us our voting rights back before the next election, and then I'm not going to be able to vote next time. I'm going to lose my vote next year. And
so you'll be totally disenfranchised.
The only thing I can do is to vote in Spanish local elections, and not everybody has that ability either. It's not a blanket ruling throughout the country or throughout the EU. So some people have no vote anywhere.
That is actually that's one of those things that I felt never really got discussed. Was that I know that the Tories have had in their manifesto for a long time now, haven't they? The idea of scrapping the 15-year rule, votes for life, or whatever they called it.
4 manifestos, I think it is now.
Is it 4? Right, yeah. And what's just obviously this is a bit tangential, but what is the hold up on that? Because I thought that was near completion. I thought that was basically.
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, the last time it went through Parliament, it was a private member's bill. I mean, I was there. I sat in Parliament and watched it get talked down. But it didn't have Labour support. Labour were actually trying to talk it down at one point, but in the end, it was a Tory backbencher that talked the bill out.
So presumably, it comes down to cynicism on the part of both parties. Labour think that there's more Tory votes out in retired people out on the continent, and presumably Labour don't want to empower those people and give more votes.
Well, also, I mean, there has been mentioned in the press now that perhaps the Conservatives don't think that we would vote for them now.
Well, yeah.
So they're not quite so keen to push it forward. And of course, with everything that's happened with Brexit and with COVID as well, it's very much on the back burner, and we see no sign of there being any movement towards putting a proper bill on the table. Right. I mean, I've just written to the Cabinet Office again because I wrote to them a month ago saying, where are we? And never got a reply. So,
really? Okay.
Yes, an ongoing battle.
Yeah, for sure. So there's more than one reason now not to potentially want to retire to Spain, because you lose your democratic rights that you were born with, potentially, if you've lived out there for longer than 15 years.
I'm not sure that alone would stop people moving, but it's certainly a lot more difficult, a lot more complicated, a lot more expensive now. And if I wanted to move now as a UK pensioner, reliant solely on the state pension as my income, I wouldn't qualify.
Really?
I wouldn't be able to move to Spain because I wouldn't meet the criteria. My income is not enough.
Right. I've actually got a question on this later, so maybe we'll park that just for a minute.
Sure.
We'll come back to that, because I think that's a really important, because there's how many people are there living in Spain who retired there from the UK? It's like over 1 million, isn't it, or something? Like
no, it's over 1 million in the whole of the EU. Okay. In Spain, there's as far as we know, there's about 350,000, but it could be significantly more than that because not everybody's registered.
Right. Okay.
They've always been probably twice as many Brits living in Spain as said they did. Right. And obviously those people are not going to be able to get away with that now.
Of course, yeah.
But of that 350,000 or however many it is, only 25% of them in Spain are retired.
Oh, really? I thought it would have been a lot higher than that. Okay.
We get all the attention. It's always about, these retired Brits who live on the costas. And actually, we're just a small fraction of all the people who live in Europe. 80% of all Brits across Europe as a whole are younger working people.
Yeah. No,
they're the ones that are going to suffer with the loss of freedom of movement, not
indeed.
me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, both sets are set to lose out, aren't they? But so I want to talk to you a little bit more about your activism and Bremain's, because obviously you and I we bumped into each other at sort of various things over the years, haven't we? We were both at the PV March and the March for Change March and the No to Boris stuff and all of that. Tell me just very quickly, just sort of like talk me through, like in like 2 minutes, the sort of the key, because you were in the UK. I felt I was seeing you more in the UK. I bet you were in the UK more than Spain half the time throughout your years of campaigning.
I was coming over once a month, and I was going to Brussels regularly as well. So I was developing relationships with lots of politicians.
Yeah.
Which was a bit of an eye-opener, because my first experience of dealing with any politicians was when I presented to the Hilary Benz EU Select Committee. That was in January 2017.
No pressure there then.
I was so nervous. It was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. But the thing
how did that go?
It went very well, actually. But the thing that surprised me, and this was true with all of my dealings with politicians over the last 4.5 years, especially in the UK, was I expected them to know lots of stuff and to be able to tell me. But any meetings I had with any politicians, it was always the other way around. I was the one with the information and they were the ones picking my brains. And, I expected to get answers from them, but they just wanted to pick my brains, basically.
That's really interesting. So do you think that's because European Union politics is just far away? It's not really on their radar. There's no votes in it. I mean, are these just dim? Are we just living through a period of really like average political movers and shakers? Like, why do you?
Well, I think we are now. I think the government we've got now is dreadful caliber.
Yeah.
But over the course of the last 4.5 years, I mean, I've met some inspiring people. It's just they tend to be specialists.
Okay.
So they'll know a lot about 2 or 3 things, but not about something else. So,
Fair enough.
But now I don't think any of them know anything about anything.
Well, certainly not this group in government. No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, there are some. Let's be fair. There are some talented, knowledgeable politicians on the opposition benches. I'm probably a few left on the government benches somewhere on the back benches, but it's hard to spot.
But they're very, very quiet.
Yeah, and that's a massive point against them, is that career/party before country. I'll never get over that, and I'll never forgive personally. But that's my own thing.
Sorry, I went off a bit of a tangent there. I was going to mention about, obviously, one of the things that I did do over the last 4.5 years was I took Theresa May to court.
Oh, okay. Tell me about this.
It was the Wilson versus the Prime Minister case, where we were looking at the referendum. We went through various stages and we lost in the end, but it was very interesting for bringing some things to light that I don't think were common knowledge at the time. And the main thing was the fact that the referendum was advisory. Had it been binding, because of the breaking of the law that happened with the referendum, the result of the referendum could have been overturned had the result been binding. So what we were trying to argue in court was, well, we know it wasn't a binding referendum, but the government chose to treat it as though it was.
Yeah.
But we didn't get very far with that argument legally, unfortunately, but at least that drew that to the attention that because of the electoral process was illegal. Had it been a general election or a binding referendum, the result would have been overturned.
So why did that not go very far legally? What were the
The judge sided with the government,
Right.
So it seems to have been the same judge that has been in all of these cases. There's been various legal challenges about the referendum, and all of them seem to have ended up on the desk of the same judge.
So are you saying that this is a specific judge that is very pro-government?
I guess, yes.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I mean, he's retired now.
Oh, really? Okay.
I mean, I don't think, there was any question of, anything untoward going on other than, it seemed a bit of a coincidence. It was always this same seemingly pro-government judge that seemed to be the one with the final decision on any of these cases.
Yeah. So you managed to fit that in around your other campaigning. So you got, because I remember that, and I remember using this same argument in some of the campaigning that I was doing about the fact that it wasn't a binding referendum, but it was treated as though it was one. I'm not sure even at that stage I fully understood the sort of legality behind all of it. I was largely taking my lead from what I was reading in the press, which is what you have to do, isn't it? But so that kind of ended, just didn't really get you anywhere. So presumably you went on and did other stuff after that. So that was in 2017, did you say?
No, that was a bit later. I think 2019 by the time we finished it, I think, yeah.
By the time you finished it. So you were doing loads of other stuff throughout that period. Just very quickly.
I did lots of marches, obviously.
Yeah, all the marches.
And I did lots of public speaking. So I spoke at various big events in London and Leeds and Manchester and Brussels. And
did you have any public speaking experience before?
No, I mean, I'd been a manager, so I was used to speaking to a group of like 10 to 30 people, but never been on a stage in front of 120,000 before.
No, it's not something people tend to do, is it, day to day? So how did you find that? Was that a daunting prospect? Did you take to it?
It was daunting beforehand, and I was very, very nervous.
Yeah.
But once I was on the stage, I wasn't the least bit nervous. I just felt quite comfortable and quite at home. I mean, to be fair, I was preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to get heckled or anything.
No, that's true.
And the crowd was so supportive, and I think, I must have got the tone right, because each time it went down very well, and I seemed to get better at it.
Yeah.
Now my husband makes a joke, and says that, don't get between me and a microphone.
I remember you were good. All the speakers I remember, there were maybe like a handful that you sort of think, okay, they were okay, but there was always a big roar, wasn't there? For the speakers at our events, which I guess is true of most events. But yeah,
I think I kind of got used to what was popular and what people were going to like, and I mean, I got a lot of encouragement from some fantastic campaigners, and also from some politicians as well. I mean, I got thanked by various politicians. Vince Cable thanked me for warming the crowd up for him, and
nice.
Andrew Adonis said what a good speech it was, and people like Julie Ward and Seb Dance were always really supportive. And I remember the last time I gave a speech before COVID in London, Seb Dance made a point to come over to say hello to me, before I went on stage, and wish me luck and stuff. So that sort of thing really helped.
He's a good guy, Seb Dance.
Fantastic, yeah.
Let's move on to identity then. I've kind of had this running through every episode, just because it's probably the thing that I find the most interesting about all of this. Well, one of the things at least. I've just got an open question. I'll just ask you and just see how you answer it. But Sue Wilson, are you a Remoaner? Yes,
I think I am a Remoaner.
Okay. Talk to me about what you think a Remoaner is. What is a Remoaner in your eyes?
Well, I mean, to me, a Remoaner is a Remainer. Somebody who supports pro-Europe and is anti-Brexit. Obviously, it was a term that was coined that was meant to be an insult, but it's an insult I'll gladly wear on my sleeve.
Okay.
I think we must never stop moaning about what the government's doing and what they've done, and the damage and the pointlessness of Brexit.
Is moaning not also the key thing that is required in a democracy? Is it not criticizing the powers of the day, the powers that be, and holding them to account? Is that not what democracy is about?
Yeah, and I think it's so important that, campaigners and the general public and the media as well, do speak out about this stuff, because we haven't had a great deal of support from the opposition parties over the last 4.5 years. And if they don't speak out, then we have to.
Do you mean, I mean, when you say the opposition parties, are you thinking of Labour specifically? Because I think the Lib Dems and the Greens are pretty good on the whole, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're talking now, you're talking Labour. Certainly, I mean, no one can criticise the Scottish National Party for their holding the government to account. No, I'd like to see more of that, and especially coming from Labour.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's been such a focus on trying to appease the red wall voters. And nobody, it seems, with the exception of, some of the smaller parties, is speaking up for the Remainers. Everybody's interested in the Leavers, that they want to win over. Well, somebody should be thinking about winning over the Remainers, because there isn't anybody doing that, obviously.
No. And I mean, certainly not at this moment. It's a poison chalice, I think. I think all the parties are looking at it and just thinking, if we can sort of downplay the Leave Remain axis and try and get back to left right, try and get back to the more traditional political cleavages, that we're back on ground that we know again, and we can fight on that ground. It's easier to fight on that ground. That's been my sort of take. And I know like Ed Davies come out and said, "Oh, I'm for the single market and I'm for the customs union and we're going to campaign to rejoin those." He sort of said that. And that's not quite rejoining the EU. But I know it's quite clear that all the parties are sort of like, let's just feed the Tories the rope they need to hang themselves a little bit longer. This is my reading of it. And see where, when we come through COVID out the other side, see what the state of the country's in, re Brexit at that stage, and then maybe we'll shift. That's kind of my very optimistic view of it. But I mean, there's a lot of Remainers right now who are just pulling their hair out because there's no one representing rejoin as an option currently, and I'm not sure if it's tactically if that would work for a party right now. So I'm not too concerned that there's not a party right now. But with that said, I still feel like we ought to be pressuring the parties, Labour and the Lib Dems specifically, to be moving in that direction eventually. I don't know. That's kind of my personal view of it.
I think there's certainly room for a lot more criticism.
Yeah.
And I can understand politicians wanting to move away from the divisiveness of the Remain and the Leave, but that divisiveness still exists, and the government are doing nothing to help that. The festival of Brexit, for goodness sake, how is that going to heal? They seem to think that's going to heal things. It's not. It's going to make it even more divisive.
All that is it's when you win a war and you have a winner's parade and you march your troops through the streets, and everyone on the sidelines is seething because the enemy is marching through your town triumphant. All it is they're just waving their thing in all of our faces and just being like, ha, we won, you lost. That's all it is. It's a victory parade, and it's more device. It's totally the opposite of bringing people together. It's so divisive, and deliberately so, in my opinion, because it's just throwing red meat to the base, isn't it?
Yeah,
in my opinion. But so we've discussed what we think a sort of a Remoaner is. What is it about the European Union? So I've asked this to everyone, and I've had different answers. And this is something that I've been asked in the past. And again, this is not a question that I find easy to answer because there's so many aspects to it. But what is it about the European Union as an institution specifically, as opposed to Europe as a continent, that you like, that you get out of bed in the morning and you have a fire in your belly about? What is it about the institution as opposed to the continent, the values, the idea, the people? What is it about the EU?
I like the fact that it's a group of countries with very different outlooks on the world who are willing to put the differences aside and work together for the common good. And I mean, and peace, people talk about the fact that, it's brought peace to Europe for years. I think for me, when I visited Brussels, it used to bring it all home to me, because just walking around the European Parliament village, and it is a village, it's so big, it's got shops and restaurants and everything. And it was just the diversity of people. You would walk down the corridor and hear 7 or 8 different languages being spoken. Yeah. There were people of all ages and all walks of life, all there with this common goal of doing what's best for everybody. Yeah. No one was looking out for themselves. They were all looking at the collective good. Yeah. And I just find that a very attractive proposition. And also, having been through Brexit and really started to understand, as a Brit abroad, just the benefits that being an EU citizen brought me. I mean, I was aware of the benefits, but I wasn't sure I knew they were all down to the EU. Well, I know exactly now what the EU was responsible for and what the British government have taken away. So I really begrudge losing my EU citizenship, even though it won't affect me personally as much as it will affect many others. And because of the withdrawal agreement, I do have rights protected that people who want to follow in my footsteps won't have those rights protected. So I'm better off than some, but it still really hurts that that's been taken away from me against my wishes.
It's interesting that you bring up peace as one of the things that make you feel fond of the EU. It's certainly one of the things that made me feel the same. And you and I have a similar, almost identical story in what you said about the European Parliament. When I went to visit, I had the exact same takeaway, which was it was so inspiring and moving to see Bulgarians, Dutch, Germans, Italians, French, Brits, all in a room talking about this common, the common goals, these shared values, shared beliefs, what they were trying to do. And those of us, I guess, who have studied history, or at least who study history and have that kind of sense that that could happen again. Like maybe not the absolute savagery of the Nazis could happen again, but certainly there could be wars in Europe, as there was with this sort of the civil war in Yugoslavia, and we've seen with Ukraine and places. There have been skirmishes and wars, haven't there, in Europe? But if we go back, not just to being different separate countries, but what tends to happen, what happened when I studied the period that preceded World War I, was you had similar sized powers who became not just competitors, but when the nationalists came in, they sowed suspicion and paranoia and hatred and xenophobia. And when that starts to happen, all of a sudden barriers go up, walls go up, fences go up, tanks are on the border, and it can spiral so quickly. And I don't. Do you feel there's a feeling in the UK that because we weren't occupied in the Second World War, do you think we have a kind of too much of a kind of exceptionalist view of our own belonging to Europe, that the other countries in Europe perhaps have that kind of more humble? I mean, what would you put it down to? This feeling that a lot of people on the continent have really bought into the idea of the EU is a foundational part of the peace there, whereas in the UK, there's just too many that people go, nah, it's not nothing to do with EU, it's NATO, or nah, there'll never be a war again. There seems to be a different opinion in the UK.
I think part of that is the sort of island mentality. I think if you live in Europe and you're used to, driving an hour or so down the road and being in a different country, or in 3 different countries, depending on where you live, I think it's much easier to feel that connection. But I think a lot of the disconnection from the UK is deliberate. It's all this, harking back to empire and, we're the best in the world. I mean, Johnson is a specialist at, world beating this and world beating that. And I think that hasn't come from nowhere. That's an attitude that's been there, that he's fostered.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. Plus, we never gave the EU any credit for anything. You drive around European countries and see signs up everywhere, EU money funded this project. You never saw that in England because the government never allowed you to see that in England. Anything that happened was always, we took the credit for it, even if it wasn't our doing.
Yeah.
So we've never grown up really with this idea that the EU is a positive influence. We've just heard all the nonsense over the years in the press of, what the EU did wrong and how they're slow at doing everything because they're so big and cumbersome. And, any credit was always down to the British government, not to the European Parliament.
And that was both Labour and the Tories that sort of pandered to that.
Yeah, I think, it's never been part of the British psyche to really talk about all the benefits that being part of Europe brought us. All we ever got was the criticism.
This actually, I guess this kind of segues quite nicely into the next question then, which is, how did the Spanish media differ from the British media in how they covered Brexit? Do you follow the Spanish media closely?
Not as closely as I do the British media,
okay.
Because obviously with Brexit, it was all about what the UK government were doing. But certainly, if it's anything Brexit related, then yes, I do follow it in the Spanish media. It was incredulity, really. I mean, the Spanish are incredibly proud of being EU members. They value their membership very highly. So they couldn't understand how any country, let alone the UK, which they have a lot of respect for, could be so stupid. Why would anybody choose to shoot yourself in the foot like that? It makes no sense.
So incredulity, that's quite a nice word, I guess. That really wasn't the tone of the British media throughout, though, was it? Let's be fair.
No.
It was the opposite of incredulity. It was arrogance and well, it was all sorts of stuff, but definitely not incredulity. So was the conversation different? Because if the tone was different, did that trigger a conversation in Spain, for instance, about the pros and cons of the EU? Or anything like that?
I don't think so, because I don't think there was too many people thinking that membership of the EU was a problem. Right. As I say, Spain is very proud of its EU membership. I think they were really looking at it in terms of, well, how is it going to affect us? How is Brexit going to affect Spain? And I think they, in some ways, have taken advantage of that. And, they are creeping up in the ranks, as it were, and becoming a more important country in Europe.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was looking at, well, how will that affect Spain? But I say, just the idea that it was just such a crazy idea. Why would anybody put themselves in that position? It doesn't compute. It doesn't make any sense to the Spanish at all.
No. This is the thing I think about when I look back at the polls that preceded the 2014 EU elections, where they looked at Euroscepticism, what were they called, the polls? The social attitude survey. What's that called again? Social attitude survey. Anyway, the yearly surveys they do on attitudes in the UK, and Euroscepticism was just like bobbing along at like 5-10% or something. And it wasn't until David Cameron said, we're going to have a referendum. When was it, 2015 he said that? Or no, he said it originally in 2012, didn't he? That it took this enormous bounce, and it became like the second thing that people cared about in the UK. So and that was largely down to one person, David Cameron, and then a little bit to do with Nigel Farage, I guess, and UKIP, but not really. And then it was just the hammer blow after hammer blow of the press, who were Eurosceptics and knew they could sell Euroscepticism to a kind of cynical audience. In Spain, do you have this kind of right-wing grip of the media that know that they could sell something like Euroscepticism in the future, perhaps, that would work? Because we didn't seem like a Eurosceptic country particularly, maybe more ambivalent 10 years ago. Do you think that in Spain there is, or in any country in Europe that you're aware of, there's an opportunity if the media has a real grip and there's cynicism? Do you think it could happen anywhere?
I think the media certainly played an enormous part in what happened in the UK, and there's no reason not to think that that couldn't happen somewhere else as well. But I don't think there was too much evidence of that here. I mean, certainly there was a concern 4 years ago that what was happening, the move towards more right-wing politics in France and in the UK and in other countries, there was a concern that was going to happen in Spain too, and then one party started to get more popular, but that seems to have died down in the last 4 years, and in the last couple of elections. We've had quite a few elections recently.
Yeah.
In the last couple of elections, the right wing have done less well. So hopefully that was just a blip. But it was the same kind of sentiments. It was all, everything's the fault of the immigrants.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you don't need to reinvent the wheel when you're selling hate, do you? Let's be honest. Populism.
The old stories work, you know. So.
Yeah. So to come back to how Brexit has impacted your life, I think we touched on this earlier, but I just wanted to just sort of like flesh this out a little bit more. Now that Brexit's happened, are there day-to-day differences, or are there things that you can point out and just be like, Brexit has robbed me of this, Brexit has changed this aspect of my life, somebody living out in Spain now?
It's a difficult one to get to grips with right at the moment, because so much of what we're being denied at the moment is a combination of Brexit and COVID.
Yeah.
The big problem for me personally is an inability to travel. Because I've got, my mum's in a care home in the UK, and I usually, visit on a monthly basis, and I haven't been able to do that for months. But in terms of longer term, when it's just Brexit and not COVID affecting my plans, because I'm retired and I live happily in Spain and plan to spend the rest of my life here, it affects me less than it will others. I don't want to go and work in another country. I don't want to go and live in another country. I'm very happy where I am. So traveling will be more expensive. Things are going to be more complicated. There'll be more paperwork involved, and all of that's a pain, but none of it's going to ruin my life.
No.
But having said that, it's not just about me personally, and this campaigning's never been about me personally. It's been about what's happening to everybody, what's happening to British citizens in Europe and in the UK, and what they stand to lose. And as I say, as I mentioned earlier, if I was wanting to move to Spain now, that would be a dream that would be off the table, because I wouldn't meet the criteria. And there are going to be other people in that situation who have had those dreams stolen from them.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got money, it's no problem. But then anything to do with Brexit, if you have a bank balance that means you can get around the issues, it's not going to be of any concern. But it's not the people with the money that have got the problems.
No. So Brexit, once again, it's just another example of Brexit hitting hardest the people who sadly vote, who were sort of, I'm just going to straight up say they were conned into voting for something that was against their interests. People, toward the bottom end of society, traditional Labour voters who thought they were going to get money for the NHS. So understandably voting for something that you thought was going to benefit you, but believing charlatans, unfortunately, who just flat out made up stuff that they thought, that Cummings had gone out and he'd done his homework, his research, and just cynically thought, what are the buzzwords that these people care about? Let's just say leaving the EU will help in that area. I mean, it's very simple, but cynical.
People were conned, and I mean, I have sympathy with people who voted for something better than what they've got, because so many that voted for Brexit didn't have anything to start with, and they were voting for change, and you can't blame many people in that situation for wanting change.
No, of course
I don't hold with all this never forgive those people that put us in this position, because it's the people we've got to hold responsible are those that conned them, not the ones that were conned.
Precisely. Yeah, exactly. And we're not going to have a country left if we don't bury the hatchets between ourselves. We need to unite, in my opinion, and take on the liars who put us in this position in the first place, who tried to destroy the country that I love and that you love. So, I mean, I was going to ask you, is it still viable to retire to the continent? I think you just basically answered that.
If you have money.
If you have money, yeah. But it's still, there's going to be extra paperwork and complications.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's different if you're coming here for work, then you have to get a visa, and a lot of the complications and the expense that go with that would be done by your employer. Yeah. So, some of that can be smoothed out for you. The problem is that if you don't have freedom of movement, then you're not as attractive as an employee, as a Brit, as an EU citizen would be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the chances of getting a job are more difficult. So even though if you've got one, getting a visa and being able to live here would be less of a problem. You've got to get the job in the first place.
Precisely. My youngest brother, Josh, he qualified as a professional ballet dancer last year. And he's living out in Bulgaria at the moment, doing his first year as a professional ballet dancer out there. But many of his peers, and if he wants to move on from the UK, they're all struggling really badly now to be taken seriously, because the ballet companies are basically just like, well, why would we bother employing you, which you're going to cost us way more money than an equally talented dancer from Italy or France or Russia. I mean, no, not Russia, but Germany or somewhere. So him and his peers have discovered this firsthand. And they were too young to vote, so it's been forced upon them as well. So yeah, there's a generational ticking time bomb on Brexit, in my opinion, which is another factor. But
I think the thing with Brexit, and it's been the case all the way through, is we're finding out new stuff every day. Yeah. We think it's complicated now. Give it another 6 months, we'll know all sorts of stuff we haven't even dreamed of up until now.
Exactly. Yeah. And when COVID passes, we'll be able to see the wood for the trees, because we'll be able to separate what was COVID, what's Brexit, and that'll be a lot simpler. Although obviously the British press and the Tories will try to muddy the waters as best as possible and blame everything on COVID, to try and smear lipstick on the Brexit pig. But so very quickly, so I mean, I don't actually know what your opinions are on rejoining, but I've kind of written down, how do we rejoin and when? Are you even on the rejoin side?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
For me, there's no other option.
Right.
We have to get back in the EU. The UK can't survive without it, I don't believe. I don't think it's going to be easy, and I don't think it's going to be quick. And I think there are steps along the road that help us to get there. Mm-hmm. I think there's no chance while we've got a Tory government, so we've got to get rid of the current government or any Tory government to have any chance whatsoever. So nothing's going to happen before the next election. No. I think it's becoming increasingly obvious, and presumably that will continue to be so, especially as all the grace periods fall away. That business needs to be in the single market and the customs union. So that would obviously be a sensible first step, but it must only be a first step. It cannot be the end goal, because if we're going to go as far as moving to single market and customs union, then we have to have a voice at the table as well.
Exactly.
So I think once you've got that far down the road, then it's not too difficult a step to say, okay, well, if we're going to take advantage of the market and the union, then we need to have a voice as well. Yeah.
Yeah. To be a leader as well, to be a leader of an institution that is trying to, I mean, a friend of mine is a journalist out in, I can't remember if he's in Vietnam or Cambodia at the moment, but he wrote an essay for me about how the European Union has basically pulled a lot of trade. I think it was with Cambodia. Because of some of their human rights abuses. So the EU have been like, no, if you're going to abuse human rights, you've signed up to this declaration. We've all signed up to it. If you're going to abuse human rights, we're going to start pulling some of our trade with you. But what's happened in London and the Tories, they're trying to exploit that by trying to get in there and trade with these countries that are abusing human rights. So this is, I think, when Dominic Raab says things like, you need to take a 10-year view of Brexit, and Jacob Rees-Mogg says it's going to be 50 years before we see any benefits. What they mean is you need to give us long enough in the UK to become a bargain basement offshore tax haven for anyone who wants to dump their money, any money laundering. And secondly, we need to find time to exploit these third world, second world countries where they're abusing human rights. The reason why they voted against not signing trade deals with countries that abuse human rights is because they want to exploit that. And so why would we not want to move back to the EU, which is clearly on the right side of history? Why would anyone want to be on the side of history where we just cynically go and sign trade agreements with regimes that are abusing so anyway, so that's another thing that just totally seems like an obvious argument for us when we try to go back in. But anyway, so very quickly, what have you learned, Sue, over the course of the last 5 years of 5 years of campaigning almost?
Well, I think I've learned I'm a lot angrier than I thought I was.
Yeah, me too.
I've learned lots of new skills. I think it's boosted my confidence as well. I mean, I was always an extrovert, so it wasn't like I was lacking in confidence, but you know, I've had the confidence to do things that I would never have dreamed possible. I've also become a bit of a writer, so I'm like writing lots of articles now. Now that's something I would never have dreamed I'd be doing in a million years.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that because as a Brit abroad, it's always been very difficult to get our voices heard. That the writing is one way I've been able to do that. So, you know, I don't get very far to speaking to politicians in the UK these days, especially, you know, from here. And even with campaigners, you know, when we talk about citizens' rights, the EU citizens in the UK have come first, and you know I'm fine with that, and I support everything that that they do as well. But we're always kind of left out because we're outside of the country. So I think getting our voices heard is important, and I think writing's one way to do that.
Yeah.
I guess certainly, if you could say there's one benefit of Brexit, it's just the amazing people I've come into contact with. So built some really strong friendships that will last a lifetime, and also rejected a few old ones.
I was resisting the urge to ask you if it had gone the other way as well.
Yes, there's a few that don't get a Christmas card anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and this is one of the things that I've actually found as well, is that before, when I was not political, it was very easy to just sort of maintain loose friendships because you weren't really putting too much of yourself out there for people to dislike. But when you decide, like I decided to do, to sort of become almost like a political pundit, like an amateur political pundit, a lot of the stuff you say can be quite divisive, and not divisive in language and tone or anything, but you're touching on things that people have an very strong emotional response to. So I've noticed a lot of school friends that I was mates with before all of this have just quietly unfriended me and stuff like that. And it's sometimes you look and just think, oh, it's sad that they've done that, but it's sort of, it comes with the territory. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, I made this decision. Life's too short. I really care about this. I want to see the country go back in the direction that it was headed. 2012. I mean, actually, no, not earlier than 2012, earlier than 2008. When we had New Labour in and things weren't fantastic, but at least you had a government you sort of trusted, other than Iraq, maybe. You sort of trusted the people in charge. You sort of trusted the characters of the people, and sort of could see good people there, and you could see the values, and they respected democracy and all of our founding principles, and all of that's completely gone now with Johnson's government. So it feels like, if anything, my campaigning energy has become even more increased since the general election, because it just feels like there's so much at stake, even now we've Brexited. But yeah, so
yeah, there's still plenty to do.
Still plenty to do, more to do, so much to do. Yeah, but yeah, it's good that we've got this community, biggest pro-EU community anywhere in Europe. It is.
Yeah, and we have to build on that, because if we want to get back into Europe, it's not going to be just straightforward. We turn up at the EU's door and say, please, can we come back? We've got to rebuild all that lost trust. Got to get them to, yes, it is going to take time. The damage that's been done to relations with the EU. I mean, even since Brexit was supposedly done, the sort of rhetoric and language that you hear from Number 10 is doing nothing to smooth those waters at all. So we've got to rebuild, and then, say, and prove to them that, we're serious, that we're not going to be asking to leave again in another 5 years down the line.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the other tragedy of this, is that it takes so long to build a bridge, and it takes a split second to dynamite the whole thing to the ground, doesn't it? So and so now we're in a construction phase. But unfortunately,
we'll build a tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sue, I think I've slightly gone over, so we'll end it there. This is before we go, is there any parting message you'd like to give to anyone who's listening to this, who's a Remainer, who might be thinking about maybe stepping up in terms of their campaigning or anything? Is there a message you want to give, a message of hope or optimism?
I think certainly never give up, and don't underestimate, the power of speaking out, and to look for people that you can work with, but also think about what you can do individually, because we've got thousands of members in Bremain in Spain, and most of them will be happy to be kept informed and leave it at that. But we need people to get more active. So even whether it's writing to the paper or writing to your MP, or think about what you can do as an individual, and don't leave it all to the likes of you and me.
Brilliant. Sue Wilson, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed that. Next week on the show, we have Jordan Byrne, the founder of Young Conservatives for a People's Vote. In this episode, we talk about the challenges that came with being a Conservative on the Remain side of the argument a few years ago. We talk about why Jordan set the group up in the first place, what its objectives were, and we also talk about whether or not there is a crisis of conservatism at the moment. I hope to see you then. Thanks so much.